Sandeep, before you leave, will we have a chance to discuss how the next few weeks will progress?
Yes, we can. Maybe
Okay.
do you want to
Yeah.
do that separately or with the students?
With the students preferred. I mean, as long as we all understand what the
Okay.
timetable.
Sure. Why not? Why
Yeah.
not? We'll
Okay.
do that. Yeah.
All right.
So
Thanks a lot.
after the presentation, after the questions, and we'll take a quick stab at the next few
Yeah.
weeks. Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's
Thanks
do
a lot.
that. Okay. So today's class is essentially to kind of introduce you to the idea of planting design. Planting design is an integral part of landscape design. Okay, so in many cases, when I speak to many of the architects, when architects hire landscape architects, they actually only expect them to do planting design. So the architectural plan probably would have which are the paved areas. It would have where the gate is supposed to be, where is the driveway. They would have already located the swimming pool and things, and then they would say, "अरे कुछ plants का information दे दो," like अच्छा हरा भरा होना चाहिए. But the truth is, planting design is just one of the many aspects of what landscape architects do. And in many cases, it's probably one of the last steps of design. But when I say that it's one of the last steps of design, which essentially mean that, while you create a tender set and a working drawing set, planting drawings are usually made towards the end. But that does not mean that landscape architects look at planting as the last thing. Okay. So in terms of its process, it's probably the last thing to be executed at site, because you cannot plant a site heavily and then go ahead with moving machinery and dust and paint and and wires being rewired for the landscape lighting and things like that. So which is why in the sequence of things, planting comes at the end. But while you're conceptualizing a project, it's very, very important that you consider planting as an integral part of landscape design. Okay, so but having said that, landscape design is not just about planting design. So since you're all architects and you're all training to be architects, and your knowledge of plants may be limited because you've never been subjected to a subject or never been a part of a subject which essentially tells you about the species details, the habits of a plant and things like that. So what we've done today is that we've kind of split this whole exercise of entering into planting design into two aspects. Okay. So as architects, you may only need to look at the first few aspects for the time being, but be aware that the second set of aspects are also equally or probably more important than the first set of aspects. Okay. So what are these first set of aspects? So since you guys do not know about what species is what and what species does what, so it's okay to kind of start imagining, like when you what is the design process that you kind of apply while you design a building. While you're drawing out the plan, you may start drawing out plans, or you may start drawing out the volumetrics to start with. But however, whichever way that you proceed, there is always a mental image that you have of the final project, right? Maybe it's not well etched out, but at least the volumetrics. There is an image of, where the sky meets the ground, what kind of plants are there on the sides and things like that. In the same manner, or which rooms are there, and like how does one room get connected to the other. So there are all these all these notions which you have in your mind. So in the same way, when you imagine a landscape project, one of the key things that you could possibly kind of include is the form of the planting. Okay, now what do I mean by form of the planting is something I'll tell you. So we have three types of plants in general. Okay, I'm hyper simplifying it so that you can understand. The first type are the trees, like the visual, the trees which kind of grow up, they have a form and they have, they have a size and they have a scale and, things like that. So, but all trees are not the same, right? In your first year and your second year, you would have probably made drawings of elevation of your building, wherein you would have supported it with trees, maybe taken from somewhere, or you would have drawn it out. But all the trees don't look like lollipops, right? The trees have different forms. Okay. So there are some trees which can be imagined to have to have a place of its own in your landscape, like for example a tree which becomes a focus, a tree that becomes an accent, right? Or there could be trees which you would probably want to hide the view of the adjacent plot, so you may want a whole a whole group of trees. So that's why I'm saying, and all trees are not lollipops. So what are they? I'm sure you know it, but we'll kind of run through it as well. So trees is one type of planting. The second type of plants that we generally would work with are the shrubs, the shrubs and the herbs, and the plants which are not like a tree, but then they're smaller than a tree, but they're not ground hugging, so they have a form. They're usually planted in clumps to, kind of give effects, so those are the shrubs. And the third category that I would like to bring your attention to are what we call as the ground cover. Okay, now what exactly is ground cover? Ground cover does what it the name says, right? It kind of covers the ground. So, like for example, lawn is one type of cover of the ground, or you could have plants which are, which are herbaceous in character. Herbaceous means it does not have a woody stem, it does not grow to be very higher, very tall, but then they kind of form a whole, cluster that would cover the ground, right? So there are trees, there are shrubs, there are ground covers. Now, these are not scientific categories, but these are categories that help you define plants in terms of its volumetrics or in terms of its form. Okay, so it's very easy. So if you can imagine three types of plants, then you can probably kind of get your abstract thoughts when you draw it out onto the paper, or when you kind of create a model, or when you kind of create a mental image. It'll help you in kind of, finding what are those jigsaws. The second is plants could also be used to create spatial enclosures. So just the same way that you have a, a courtyard, which is bound by walls, or you have a room that's bound by walls and a ceiling, or in landscape, I find many of you, kind of make frames and arches and pergolas. So and why do you do that? Because you want to kind of create spatial enclosures. You want to kind of define different spaces. One, like there's a large lawn, and on the side there's a small open to sky classroom where you would like your smaller group meetings to happen and things like that. So rather than creating it with, let's say, frameworks and frame walls like how Louis Barragan or Ricardo Legorita or Charles Correa may have done, you could also create and do the same with planting. So what you don't necessarily understand, but then what happens from now on when you step out onto a park or onto a design space or even an undefined space, like try and visualize the spatial enclosures that are formed just because of planting. So planting is a very, very important tool to kind of do that. The third thing that I would like to bring your attention to is that planting also allows you to play with visual textures. Okay, so again, something that as architects one may not have noticed, but once you go through this exercise and once you consciously start noticing things around, you'll realize that it's not just about the building, but for a project, it's also about the visual textures that are formed by the planting. That also kind of defines the space. Like, can you imagine a Japanese garden without those fine-grained, fine-leaved plants all around, or can you imagine an English garden without those weeping willows and, all those colors, in those trees and the autumn and, things like that. So these are things which are kind of tacit in a way that, it's there, but we don't really realize them. So these are the three main important pointers that I would like you to keep in mind, when you kind of think of planting design. But having said that, those are not the only set of things that you need to be worried about. Okay, so the next three things that I'm going to tell you are the second set of very important ideas which you need to know before you indulge in planting. But I told you, nevertheless, at this stage, it's fine. You learn it as you go by. One is your knowledge of the botanics of the plant. Like you need to know the species of the plant. Now, we all know what species is. So if I have to give you like a cheat sheet of how do we go about this, is that uh, different species which are related, they belong to one genus. Okay, so and different genuses, then become an order, and then some orders become a family, or I may have missed it out, and then eventually, you have the plant kingdom. So that's how it's been classified. Um, so there is class, order, family, and phyla and things like that. So you don't have to worry about all those things as an architect or a landscape architect. But what we need to know is that we need to be very, very careful, because some of the plants, when you go to a nursery and when you buy them, they may seem very similar, but they may be completely different species, or they may be two different species which belong to the same genus. So as a sapling, they may look similar, but when you plant it out and when they grow up, suddenly you will find that, oh, the three trees which I wanted to create an enclosure of a square, so, and I planted four different trees. Three of them grew up to have pink flowering bombax flowers, while the fourth one grew up to form a completely different tree. Because as a sapling, when I was selecting it in the nursery, all the four seemed the same. So you need to have a fair enough idea of how of the botanical characteristics of a species. Sometimes when the leaves look the same, if you just turn the leaf around and look at the tip where the leaf stalk comes and meets with the stem, you may find that there is a small bract there, like a small thorn kind of a thing there. So sometimes the only difference that you could spot when these plants are small is just that. Like for example, a gulmohar and a jacaranda. So a gulmohar, I'm sure you all know. Like our college has abundance of gulmohars outside our road, right? So a jacaranda is called a neeli mohar. Looks very similar to a gulmohar when it's not flowering, but it's got blue, purple kind of flowers. Clusters of flowers. Beautiful tree. Um, I haven't seen too many in Mumbai, but I'm sure my other faculty members can actually point out places where they are probably like visible. So a gulmohar and a neeli mohar, like when they are small saplings, they may look almost the same. And I've had experiences in projects wherein the contractors have kind of goofed up. But the easiest way to find the difference between them is that Gulmohar's leaves have, I mean, the leaflets. One leaf has many small leaflets in it because they're compound leaves, okay? So each of those leaflets has a rounded tip, while in a Neeli Mohar or a Jacaranda, the leaf looks exactly the same, from a distance. But when you go closer, you would find that the leaf tip is actually sharp. So, there are these fine differences that one needs to know, when it comes to differentiating these. The second is the habit of the plant. Not all plants would grow everywhere, and not all plants would have the same requirement of water. So, like for example, we love a certain kind of a palm, like it looks lush green, and it's like it's not a palm, like like it doesn't have a stem with a crown on the top, but rather it's a bushy palm, like let's say rhaphis, for example. We'll see what they are in some time from now. Just bear with me for the time being. So there is this lush palm that you've planted, and right in front of it, you want a certain kind of plant, which is which you went to a nursery and you saw and you liked it and you said, "This is the plant that I want." Now, imagine if that palm, I mean the lush green background palm, the requirement of water is extremely high. And if that front foreground plant that you've kind of planted, its requirement of water is very less in the sense that if you pour more water, its roots will rot. And then, it's going to be a disaster if you're going to plant it because on the day one of your planting, you would probably plant them very close to each other. And, in the first few weeks, things would seem fine. The first set of rains that come in and go, you would start seeing differences. So then obviously these plants don't go with each other because the mali pours water to keep the palm green, the front thing rots and it dies off, then you have to keep replanting it. So there are various things that you need to know. So requirement of water is one, availability of sunlight is another. Like you need to know which plant. Like I've had projects, so in my growing up years, I've done projects wherein I've planted ferns in a certain marketing office of an experience center of a big builder, and it looked beautiful because in Delhi, like they all wanted this tropical look, and the project was also, I think, dubbed some urban forest or something. So ferns look beautiful. We planted them in the hope that they'll grow. Within 2 weeks, all the ferns died, like it wilted off. And the reason being, ferns cannot take direct sunlight. And just to add to the problems, so the experience center was right next to the real construction site. And there was this huge glass facade on one side. So right from 11 o'clock to let's say 3 o'clock, the radiation of the sun would fall onto that glass, and it was a slightly teda facade. And that entire thing would, kind of reflect the sunlight onto the garden. So nothing that we would plant would grow. I mean, leave alone the ferns, even if we plant the sturdiest of plants there, that would also not grow. So I think eventually they said, oh, the landscape architects are bad. They replaced the landscape architects and they got some local vendor to lay some plastic grass on it because nothing would grow there. So you need to be very, very well aware of your site, of the kind of solar light conditions, the kind of water. There have been times wherein you would get projects wherein the salinity of the soil is very high. Let's say like a project near the Run of Kutch, for example, or a project near the coast. So Run of Kutch has a different problem because the soil itself has salt content in it. While near the coast, maybe the soil doesn't have salt content in it, but salt spray happens, so the leaves should not get burnt. Now, have anyone of you ever wondered, like why is Marine Drive in Bombay planted with the same kind of tree that you would find in, let's say, the Worli Sea Face or, near the Haji Ali Wala edge? You would find the same tree in all these places. Can anyone tell me which tree is that? Or do you even remember that there are these trees which are planted on a line? Okay, it's a very broadleaf tree, and the tree is called Barringtonia racemosa. Okay, now why is Barringtonia the preferred choice? Because the first time I saw Marine Drive after graduating as a landscape architect and coming to Bombay for a project, and Bombay aaya hai to Marine Drive jana hi hai, went there and I wondered, so that was the time when I was like, kind of picking up cues of how do you look at plants, how do you look at things and things like that. So I looked at the tree and I remember asking my then boss, that of all the trees that Bombay actually supports, why this tree? It's not even a beautiful looking tree. It does not even have a large canopy. It does not even cover the whole space. So why? And my boss also said, no idea. It's a government decision. But I went back and I read about it, and then I realized that after so many months, years, like I read about it and realized that Barringtonia has the ability to withstand salt spray. And that is the reason why that tree was chosen, and not, let's say, like a rain tree or some other tree, which would have probably had a much better looking canopy, but it would have wilted while it was a sapling itself. So the habits of a tree, that's very, very important. The third, and probably something which many of us don't really think about, are the ecological implications of planting. Okay, so once you get into the profession, once you start working, you will when you go to nurseries, your nursery guy will call you to a side and say, "Saab, आपके लिए एक मस्त plant लाया हूँ. ये अभी Madagascar से fly in करके लाया है. Look at it flowering, and you look at it, and it's a beautiful kind of a shrub which has orange red flowers, something that you haven't seen anywhere. And he said, बिल्कुल tropical है जी, इसका तो बात ही कुछ और है. थोड़ा महंगा है, आप देख लीजिए आपके किसी प्रोजेक्ट में लगेगा कि नहीं. Any landscape architect would say, ki, let me give it a try, but be very, very cautious when you do these things, because, what you don't know, but then what really happens is that there have been economies, there have been countries which have literally gone completely kaput because of the movement of plants and animals around in the world. Okay, now I'll tell you one example. I'm sure you all would know about this. There is a certain species of certain floating plant called Icornia crassipus. I don't know the Marathi name of it nor the Hindi name of it, but it's a plant that basically has a globe, like a ball, and then has leaves, and it has got lovely purple, pink, lavender kind of flowers sometimes. And it's a plant that kind of floats and it covers water bodies. So if you go to many parts in Maharashtra, Goa, and in many other parts in India, you'd find that most ponds are covered with this plant. It may, from a distance, it may seem as if it's land, but it's actually the Icornia crassipus that kind of covers this water. Icornia was a plant from the Amazonian basin, which probably was brought into the Calcutta Botanical Garden some 150 years back, because some British or some Indian royal thought that is a beautiful plant to put in their water gardens. Imagine one plant that was gotten into India and that has now become an invasive species around. And there are many other plants that have done the same. So, because of which all countries, including India, have a plant and animal quarantine cell at every international airport. If you have traveled around, you would see that, they will actually check. They'll ask you, are you carrying some plant species, or, or some other animals or animal products and things like that? It's because of this reason. One of the reasons is this. The other reason is, of course, zoonotic transfers, of diseases or plant diseases, so many other things. So, but this invasiveness is a very, very big issue. So you have to be aware of what plant does well in a certain ecological area. You need to be aware of those things. And secondly, it's always preferred that you plant plants which are probably beneficial for the local fauna. So a plant that would probably do very well, let's say in Rajasthan, may not be the most appropriate choice for a project in Lonavala, for example. In Lonavala, maybe we have a choice of choosing a varied palette of plants from Lonavala itself. But having said that, these are all decisions that we take as architects and landscape architects. So these three things you may not be very aware of, but that shouldn't deter you from not thinking about planting design as an integral part of landscape design. Okay. So now coming to the main part of the discussion. So what did I mean by form of a tree? Okay. So And I told you, not all trees are lollipops. But having said that, these are also hyper simplified diagrams. But if you know plants, you would know that there are trees which probably have a character which is very similar to this. So there are trees which have a globular canopy. So every tree has a stem and every tree has a canopy. So trees which have a globular canopy. Now, where would you plant a tree with a globular canopy? One very good example of such a tree is mulch tree. If you know mulch trees, they actually have a proper globular canopy. Mimosops LNG is what we call it in Latin, and it's binomial nomenclature, but in Marathi it's called mulch tree. Then there are trees which have an oval canopy. I'm sure you'll find many trees like this, which have a sort of an oval kind of canopy. Then there are trees which are conical in shape. So not exactly a perfect conical, a perfect round, but nevertheless, moreover the same. Like the Ashoka trees that you would find, Polyalthia longifolias. Like many of those have a shape like this, or let's say the deodars, the pine, the trees, like if you ever have projects, let's say in the northeast or in places like that, you'd find trees which are coniferous in nature or conical in nature. And then you would find trees which have a sort of a irregular canopy, but the branches are drooping. Like I'm sure you would have seen a weeping willow in some of the movies, or like if you've ever been to a hill station, weeping willows have drooping kind of a character. A tree that is very similar to this. I can't even call it a tree because it's like a shrubby tree or tree shrub, kind of a thing, is a tree called bottle brush. Okay, bottle brushes have a drooping canopy. They don't really grow up to be big trees, but they have, like leaves which droop out. And at the end of every, branch, there are these, there's a compound inflorescence, like exactly like a bottle brush, that you used to, a red colored flower that kind of comes in with yellow dots, so that's called bottle brush, something that's very commonly seen in parks in Bombay. Then you would find trees which have a spreading canopy. So like for example, a rain tree. I'm sure you would have all seen rain trees. Anyone who would have gone to South Bombay and like having gone around Oval Maidan and all those other roads, you would definitely find those huge trees, which kind of cover those avenues, right? Rain trees have a canopy which is somewhere in between spreading and round. So it's actually spreading, but at the same time, the top of it is very globular. So that's a different kind of character. So if you have a narrow site, I'm sure you wouldn't want to put a tree which has a spreading nature, right? You may want to go for a tree which has a different characteristic altogether. Then there are trees which have a canopy which is like an upright funnel. Now imagine you were to create an avenue, like where with a statue at the end of it, you're building at the end, and you had to kind of create an avenue, a pedestrian avenue. So what kind of a tree would you go with? Like a tree with an upright funnel or conical or maybe oval or round, I don't know. So, and then you have trees which do not fall into any of these categories, which are irregular in nature. Okay, so a basic understanding of these is good because when you actually start drawing out your trees, or so instead of just drawing out circle, 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 with a circle master onto your drawing, or just kind of imagining lollipops, SketchUp library में जाके कुछ भी डालने से अच्छा है कि if you can actually think of each of those spaces and imagine what kind of a form of a tree would you want to kind of go with. So now let me talk to you about trees which could be chosen on the basis of creating spatial enclosures. Just the same thing that I kind of spoke to you about, because I think being in third year, even a basic understanding of this would be great, or a great starting point to start thinking about planting. Okay. So there could be multiple ways in which you could imagine plants. So when I say, okay, planting, it's not just about trees, but also about shrubs and ground cover as well. So one of the many ways, so there are multiple ways in which we could look at it. The first thing that I would like to talk to you about is accent planting. Okay, so would you want to like create an accent in your landscape or in that particular space? Like you have your building and you have this edge, like, so would you want to kind of create an accent? Or let's say it's a park and there is a road edge and there's a jetty edge on the other side. So would you want to kind of create a sort of an accent, like when you get dropped off at the jetty and when you're there and you're kind of looking around and exploring the site for the first time, what would it be? So, so one of the many ways in which you could create accent is by using flowering plants. But then be very, very aware that these flowering plants will not flower for the entire seasons, which is why seasonality is a very important component. So like for example, gulmohars may only flower during the summer. Tabibias may flower just before the summer starts. While there are some other plants which the shrubs can actually flower for a much longer part of the year. Like for example, just not flowering when it's raining heavily, or just not flowering when it's, when it's peak of winters, but otherwise throughout the year it may flower. So, uh, so this is exactly what I said, like open or accent planting, like let's say there is a drop off, and when you are there and, when you see these clusters of plants which are, or trees which are there, which need to have a certain form and, a certain kind of a visual texture, so maybe you would kind of select plants based on the space that is there. So maybe these trees could be, like kind of specimen trees. So you would go to a nursery and you would just choose those trees with care. Like maybe there are 200 trees that you need for your project. You're not going to go around a nursery and select all the 200. I mean, you could do that. But then, maybe you would give it to a contractor who would get these plants. You would give detailed specifications of, like how many branches should be there, what should be the height, what should be the vernier caliper dimension of the stem at the chest height of a person, like 1.5 meters from the ground, what will be the dbh, so you would give all those considerations, because otherwise many a times you would know that, you will give all the specifications, plant side पे आएगा and they'll say, साहब आपने ही तो बोला था 3 मीटर का प्लांट चाहिए, लेके आए हो ना 3 मीटर है. You look at it, yes, है तो 10 feet का plant, but the stem would be itna patla, and there'll be two leaves at the top, which you are so sure that if you plant it and with the incoming summers, it's going to die off, or the project is going to get inaugurated in like 3 months from now, and that tree is not going to look like a tree at all. So you have to be very, very careful when you specify these trees. So maybe these accent plants are something that you would personally go and choose, because you would want this and that tree to kind of look okay when they're planted together. Before planting at site, you would actually want to go and, kind of turn around that plant when it's still in its bag. You would want to tell them, yeah, I mean, plant them in that manner, cut out the bags, like make the hole and then you place it in and then you take care of the trees. So, so these are trees which are basically meant for an eye-catching location. Okay, so that's accent planting. Now there could be many, many plants that could be used for accent planting, especially in Mumbai. So the palette that I'm showing are plants which are more tropical in nature. So I'm sorry for those of you who are in Jaipur and Jodhpur and all. But the reason why I'm showing you this palette is also because if you're working on your AD projects in Cochin and in your landscape project also in Cochin, then maybe it's a good idea to show you plants which are, which can do pretty well in that biogeography. Not all of these trees are actually local. Okay, like for example, gulmohars are actually a native of Madagascar. Okay, they were brought in into India. The baobab, these are trees from the African continent, but because Indian peninsula was also a part of the African peninsula at some point of time in the past, so you would even find some baobabs in the Deccan Plateau. And there are baobabs in Mumbai as well. There is one baobab in JVPD also. And these are huge trees. You have to see these trees to believe and understand what they are. They are trees that look crazy. They have a silvery bark. They are huge, and their trunk. I'm sorry, the image may be very small for you to actually even see it clearly, but the trunk is like something, and the tree actually in the night, on a moonlit night, it looks surreal. And that's why, there are a lot of legends which are associated with the baobab. So if you go to places like Mandu and, many places in Deccan Plateau, in Madhya Pradesh especially, you would find these ancient relic, baobabs which have probably sprouted from the old baobabs which may have been there for, millennia, is what it's believed. So they may not be the same tree, but sprouted from the same, ancestor. So, so there are multiple stories, multiple narratives about, all these trees as well. Now, specimen planting or accent planting does not necessarily have to be about trees only. It could also be about cluster planting of shrubs. So you could, and if you look at it, you would find the visual textures of these plants are very different, right? Like a plant like this, let's say Galphemia glauca, which attracts a lot of butterflies, may look very different from the texture of, let's say, this particular plant. Razelias, which look like the horse tail, like it literally looks like the tail of a horse, and with these firecracker like, flowers at the ends. So the visual texture of this is very fine. It's almost like as if somebody has, gone ahead and stippled the ground, while the visual texture of, let's say, bougainvilleas are kind of completely different. Right? It's got a much bolder texture and things like that. So you have to be very aware of it. So that was with accent planting. The second type of planting that I would like you to kind of look at is edge planting. So your site may not happen in isolation. Like for example, your sites in Kerala for sure they have a surrounding. They have surrounding things. Maybe some of the sites have really ugly looking backside of the other plot. Kind of looking onto your site. In such cases, it's your decision as to whether do you want to kind of plant and block that site. Like just block the planting so that the views are kind of blocked, or let's say some of the sites may have beautiful views of the water, or may have beautiful views of the church beyond or the Dutch palace beyond, things like that. So in that case, would you want your planting to kind of frame the views or, kind of give filtered views? Or let's say you're getting down at the jetty and your strategy is not to reveal the entire landscape, but to kind of give them a hint of what is happening so that they kind of walk into the space and then they kind of walk through the plants and the trees and then voila, like you see the landscape in front of you. Maybe our sites are too small for it in this semester, but you're going to work on larger projects in future, right? So this is basically a learning for all of it put together. Okay, so that's exactly how you would kind of think about the filtered views or the edge planting. That with planting you can actually block views, you can actually frame views, you can actually give a hint of what is behind. So in this case, then if you're driving through, what would you want people to see beyond? So that would mean no understory planting. Like the shrub component may be there, but the shrubs are not tall shrubs. Maybe they are ground hugging shrubs, or it's just ground cover on the ground. But then there is no understory planting in that case. So when you're in a car and when you're supposed to look out, like when you're driving and let's say you're designing a highway and it's supposed to be a scenic highway and there is, there is a beach on one side, or let's say you're designing the Juhu Tara Road, and then there are filtered views there, and someone as MCGM has asked you to kind of redesign that patch, and they've asked you to kind of create a green street of things. So would you go around and plant all these trees there? You may not, right? You may want to kind of plant trees which would allow people to see the beach, but at the same time give some shade to the people below, and also kind of stabilize that areas. Right. But if you're a pedestrian, like your view lines would change when you're a pedestrian, when you're in a car, when you're sitting somewhere and looking at the landscape. So you need to be very well aware of all of these things. Okay. And also, if you, something which is not to do with the spatial enclosure only, but with respect to landscape design, is that whenever you have planted edges, there is a, a certain slope that you would want to maintain. And there would be some level of a bioengineering method that you would like to employ to kind of stabilize that slope, right? You wouldn't want to leave a slope exposed because in the next rain, you would know there'll be rills that are cut into the soil. The soil may just flow out and it may go onto the paved path and then it would, kind of just mucky up the water and it'll be a big problem. So you would want to kind of think of putting, a basic coir geotextile fabric there and kind of stabilize the soil. And in between the geotextile fabric, which basically looks like a net or a very fine net, you would want to kind of make these holes and plant your ground cover into it so that the ground cover can eventually. So the coir geotextile, coir because it's a naturally biodegradable material, would disintegrate within a season. And by that time, the plants would have taken over. So, like, and this is something that we would do if we were to plant on a site which is exposed to heavy rain. And we know that, okay, before the plants would take over, the rains would come in and it would wreak havoc. And so you need to be aware of the seasons. But right now, as architects, it's essentially the form and the spatial enclosure and the sectional understanding of what you would like to do. And how would you want to treat an edge? So this edge is not applicable for the sites which are next to the backwater, unless you want to create a deck in your plot and then kind of slope it up. Okay, because the backwater edge is fairly steep. So, but then there is no stopping you from creating a deck on the side and then sloping it up. So be aware of it. But the canal edge, maybe yes, this could be totally applicable. Okay, so there are various trees that you could use for this purpose. But the other way of looking at it is that if it's a beautiful edge and if you want the water to be seen, maybe you don't go with so many trees at all. You just probably look for, some trees like just palms or, you just look like trees which just kind of, specify the edges. That's it, like they become markers and that's it. Okay. So again, to kind of continue this discussion onto edge planting as a buffer, or like you want to screen off the views, like how I said, like a undesirable view of the backside of a building with all those stack of pipes and like the service toilet kind of opening out and the exhaust fan, burling out air and all of it. You want to kind of block that. Then there are ways of doing it, so and how do you do that? So even if it's a very narrow space, you could actually play around with something which in landscape architecture we call as vertical stratification. Vertical stratification essentially is nothing, it's just a fancy term for layering. So you have plants or trees which are very tall, which are planted towards the back edge of from where we are seeing. If in the visual foreground, this takes the back edge of it. That's where the tall trees would come in. And let's say this is a residential tower or a parking tower or whatever, a view that you definitely don't want from your garden. And right in front of it, you have medium or small plants which are kind of grown. And on in front of it, you would have another set of plants which would kind of fill in that canopy. And then you would have large kind of shrubs at the edge. Maybe you could, if you have more space, you could also kind of layer this down, so that from the ground that I am standing in, when I look up, there is this my view is kind of guided up. So this is called vertical stratification in landscape planting. But vertical stratification, otherwise in ecological terms, is a term used for rainforest, wherein you have trees and plants at different canopy levels, because the sunlight kind of streams in. And so, each of those stratified layers of species of plants may have similar characteristics, and it's amazing to note that most of the indoor plants that we use in our buildings are usually the plants which are of the lowest strata, or in the vertical stratification of a rainforest, because those are the plants which get very minimal sunlight but they can thrive without it. Okay. So, and those are the plants which you use as, let's say indoor plants within, and if you look at those plants, they're also the plants which may not have chlorophyll completely. I mean, their leaves are not entirely green. They may be variegated, or they may have multiple colors in them, things like that. Because what chlorophyll does is when the incident sun rays fall on it, it absorbs the light spectrum except for green. Green is reflected back and all the other colors are actually absorbed in. So, so in a rainforest at the lowest edge, what happens is the other color palettes are mostly absorbed by most of these colors, and it's only green that's kind of reflected around, which is why these plants, have compounds which absorb the other color spectrums except for green. So they basically reflect all the other colors. That's how we see those colors in those leaves. So anyway, that's trivia. But here, what we're doing is we are doing it basically for screening purpose and also to kind of soften the edge. So the idea is not to just go and plant tall trees and say, or make a wall or make a whole green wall kind of a thing. Those are all other ways of doing it, very architectural ways of doing it. Like you put a whole, scaffolding up and then you put a green wall up. These are all other ways of doing it. But if you can manage it with natural planting, then why not? Because what trees also does is that it doesn't really hinder the views of the residential towers. Yes, it would kind of block it to a certain extent, but at the same time, it will allow for the wind to move through. Unlike, let's say, a scaffolding with, like a green wall or something like that. Okay, and also it's highly low maintenance, right? I mean, it's natural planting. So out here, you may not look for plants which are flowering in nature or which are showy in flowering. So all trees would flower. I mean, most trees would flower. But then not all flowers would be showy. Like for example, neem. If I ask you how many of you have seen a flower of a neem, I'm sure some of you would have really seen it. But there will be many few of you would have seen it because neem's flowers are not very showy. They are almost whitish green in color. So yeah, so there are trees and then there are shrubs which would probably form the front edge of it. Taller shrubs, like let's say Clerodendron paniculatum, which is also called the pagoda tree. Sorry, the pagoda plant. And then you have chandanis, Tabernae montanas, and things like that. So they are shrubby trees or tree shrubs, like so they kind of form the canopy edge. Then you could use planting to frame. Okay. So I'm sure you understand what it is from the drawings, right? So framing could be very formal, like what you see here, like or here, wherein the idea is to kind of form a perfect avenue, and then you have these trees there, and at the end, you may have a sculpture, or maybe your building is there, or maybe there is something else, or there is a memorial there, I don't know what, or maybe there is nothing there, it's just the landscape beyond. Okay, so this is a formal way of framing it. But what you don't realize, but what planting also does is it also informally frames things for you. Like in this case, it's basically not planted in regimental lines, right? It's planted as clumps and clump, and there you see the open sky and the sunlight and the view beyond. So while I'm here, and even the pathway doesn't take a straight line, it also kind of meanders through this, and even the clusters of shrubs are also done in a way wherein it softens the edge between the trees and the pathway. So this is like an informal way of framing the same spot. So, then how would you do it? Would you actually have tall trees to do it? Would you also not want the views to get, dissipated through those trees? So would you want to have a secondary set of canopy trees, like smaller trees or taller shrubs above the eye level that would, kind of hold up the view and, kind of define the enclosure? Would you want to kind of play around with the land itself? Like would you want to kind of create those berms and maybe not tall berms. Tall berms are also an option, but small sites, tall berms, maybe not. So up to you. Design decisions. Do you want to kind of raise them so that the ground cover also helps out? Many times what happens is when you have large patches and when it's flat and when you go and plant these beautiful ground cover, and you would think that okay, अच्छा हो बनेगा हाँ plan में अच्छा दिखता है like you can imagine all those colors, but in reality when I'm like 5 foot 9 inches tall and I'm looking around, and I really don't see all those ground covers in its entirety. But if I would have been a bit more intelligent and if I would have, kind of done that flattened large planting bed with a slight berm, and then kind of sloped it back to the other pathway on the other side. Or if there's no other pathway, then maybe I just did a slight berm, and if I planted things out there, maybe the effect would have been completely different. So these small things actually matter. And they probably come with, like you make a mistake and then you learn. But in your case, luckily, you don't have to make those mistakes. We are here to, kind of tell you things that we know or we think of, while we see your project. So, yeah. So would you actually have these trees, and what is, and in this particular case, the idea was not just to frame what is beyond, but it was also to kind of frame the sky. Like, so when you walk, you see the sky and you see the sunlight kind of streaming in. So, that's about framing. I don't have to kind of go on and on about it. I think you guys have gotten the drill by now. So then how do you kind of go about this? Like you frame or you funnel, and then you have something very similar, like let's say directional planting. The intent here is to kind of direct your views or to direct your pathway to a certain focus. Okay, so in that case, and again, like as I said, like imagine if there was a beach on one side and you really do not want to kind of cluster that beach view by planting trees so close to each other. So then one way of doing it is by resorting to plant palms. And in a site like Cochin or in Bombay, palms are, I mean, they grow well. They are a part of the local this thing. Even though the palms which I've shown here, none of these are native plants. Huh? So these are Roystonia regias. They are a British import into India. So yeah, so these are royal palms, British import to India. But then yeah, I mean, you could replace it with any of the local palms. Let's say Areca cateshu. Areca is uh, the beetle palm. Like the one from where you get the beetle nut. What old people use पान चबाने के लिए पान के अंदर जो वो nut होता है. That basically comes from the beetle palm. Uh, yeah, so so this is about partially framing it. Like you're giving it a direction, but at the same time you're allowing for the views to be dissipated all around the site. So it does create a certain effect. So if you want a very architectural kind of a landscape, like something like what Garrett Egbo may have done. You can probably Google up these names later. Garrett Egbo may have done, wherein he would like to create, a focus of a tomb in the center, and then he would want to kind of create, a series of spots or lines, that would, kind of imagine an axonometric where there are these lines which are drawn, and you are kind of entering into that spot, and you would want it to be a very architectural kind of an imagination of a landscape. Then maybe this is the way to go. And then we have clustered planting. So this is something that works extremely well in a tropical climate like ours. So, the idea here is shrubs are not planted one, and one. So this is something that I find that, there are beautiful high-end projects, but because the client decided not to hire a landscape architect, but he thought maybe the architects are good enough to do the landscape. And the architects, what do? They go to the internet, they search for all these fancy plants, and then they would go to a nursery and say, "ये दो दीजिए, वो तीन दीजिए, ये चार दीजिए," like so, वो हो जाएगा. And then you would just plant one or two, and then you would sit back and think that okay, it'll fill up. But sometimes it doesn't happen. So certain plants, as an individual, that plant may not give the same kind of characteristic effect that we would want as designers, so which is why we need to kind of cluster them together. So clustered planting works very well if you have to create like a naturalized landscape, or let's say a very tropical looking landscape, wherein because that's how planting happens in its real habitat, right? You wouldn't find one tree of a certain species alone, standing alone. You may find sometimes, but usually, in an untouched landscape, if you go, you would find the same kind of plant sky cluster. दूसरे kind of plant sky cluster. That's because, one, there would have been a mother plant which would have then, kind of left its seeds around, and the others would have grown up, and that thing keeps continuing. And then, you know, certain ecologies kind of get formed in these areas, certain interrelationships between that plant and this plant, and, things like that. So if you were to kind of create a very tropical kind of an atmosphere, you would basically want to go with clustered planting. So in here, what happens is there's a diversity of texture, and also it kind of softens that very hard-edged, the kind of human landscapes that we kind of draw up. Okay, so this is, I'm sorry for the tropical waterfall atmosphere and all these names, because this has been taken from another project. So, so there the needs were different. So which is why, you see all these sectional things. I really didn't, kind of draw them up for this particular lecture. Sorry. So yeah, so then you have shaded canopy and framing. Again, similar as framing, but then it's shaded. So just the same difference I told you, like if you're driving in one of those roads in JVPD as well, you would see that the trees from both sides, the canopies would, kind of merge, and it would kind of form a sort of an enclosure wherein you would see the sunlight streaming in through the boughs of these trees, but and the shadows that it forms, so those shadows are called dapple shadows, DAPPLE, dapple shadows, and those are and that's also a visual texture that you could play with, like, so if you plant your plants with a certain sense of care, and like with the solar angles and other things, it's quite phenomenal that, in certain times of the day, you would find the plant, the sunlight streaming in through the thing. So yeah, so this is about it, like, do you find a framing order or a canopy of shade that you would like to create? And in that case, you wouldn't just go in for two trees on both sides, provided you have the space. You would maybe want to kind of go in for an entire grove of trees or a forest of trees, there is this another technique that landscape architects use to kind of define space. Okay, it's called a bosque, a BOSQUE. Yeah, so a bosque is basically a grid of trees in plan. It's like a grid of trees which are planted in plan, and that forms a plaza. So it's not a plaza which is like a European plaza that we are used to seeing, which is completely devoid of plantation with just a fountain in the center. But this is again a plaza wherein you have these trees which are planted in a grid, but because it's planted in a grid, and your access, the way that you're walking around in that plaza is probably predefined, or you're free to kind of move around, it forms a certain story on the top. It forms a certain visual texture that is there. It forms a certain spatial enclosure which is there. So a bosque is also another way of kind of planting out a plaza. You can write down these terms and probably Google them up later, or maybe have discussions with your mentor. So in order to create a canopy shading thing, you may not want to go with a conical tree, right? I mean, you could, but then you may not want to do it, because the idea is to kind of create this pavilionish kind of a character, wherein the columns are replaced by the trunks and the roof canopy is replaced by the canopy of these trees. So you may want to go with a different kind of a tree, right? I mean, a tree which probably has a tall stem and then it has a canopy that kind of grows over, or a tree which has a spreading kind of a character. So, and because we know for sure that in a bosque, there's going to be shade. So the ground cover would, the understory planting would probably be shade loving, and these are all ferns which are there. So because it's shade loving, and because it's tropical, there is enough moisture in the air, and these ferns may grow well as well. And then, just to kind of take this discussion further, if you have to create a very tropical forest like atmosphere, then what would you do? You would go in for tropical broad-leafed plants, like plants which probably are not very showy in its flowers, except for a few, but mainly plants which have very, very, like very showy foliage, right? Foliage means leaves. So, and these are plants that would probably do very well when they are planted in clusters, and when they're planted with vertical stratification. So here again, you'd find there is a diversity of texture that is there. it forms these natural forms and it kind of gets clustered, and the leaves and the flowers actually give it a kind of a very tropical forest like space, even though the space may be kind of limited, because it basically what it does is cuts off your view from anywhere else, and if there is, let's say, a gurgling water body that you're creating just for that sound effect, and if these plants are actually chosen with care, that they also attract certain birds and butterflies and other kind of animal form, so you could kind of create a smaller kind of an impression of an ecosystem in a smaller space. Okay, so for that, what all kind of plants would you go in with? So you don't have to know the species of the plants for the semester at all. I mean, we're not looking at a planting plan wherein we expect you to learn trees and plants, but what we need is a notion behind, or the intention behind, what does this circle mean and what do these kharach khurach mean, like does it mean something, so it's the logic that is more important, the thought that goes behind it, and then of course you have planting, which is done for, let's say, edge definition, or let's say to provide shade for seating below. I mean, these steps could have very well been just normal steps like in front of Asiatic Library in Mumbai, right? I mean, stark architectural steps devoid of any life, and the people are the ones who kind of populate it. But what happens during the daytime? Nobody uses it because sunlight falls on it. But then yes, there was a reason. They wanted to showcase the classical building behind it, so they couldn't have kind of gone ahead and planted it. But in a landscape project, there are no such concerns, so you could actually create a project wherein you could actually break these hard edges and create these breakout spaces wherein one functional space also doubles up as a space for pause, for reflection. So there are multiple ways in which you could kind of do planting for edge definition. Like one of the ways is like wherein let's say you don't necessarily plant the trees on both the edges, you kind of break them away. You have a cluster of trees on one side, you have these intermediary plants, like the shrubby plants that would kind of set the set some level of enclosure to that human eye level. And then on the other side, maybe you kind of have the steps, and you have these filtered plants which would give you some view of the landscape beyond. On the other side, maybe there is a vertical drop, and you have, so on one side it's just a wall, there is nothing. It's maybe it could be a feature wall, or you could actually have creepers that are planted to kind of fall on this side. Let's say the service area of your building is here, and you have a pathway along the water that kind of curves around. There's no one stopping you from actually having a planter on the top and having these plants kind of cascade down. There are various ways in which you could define these edges, for planting, and then over here you could play with visual texture, you could play with flowering, you could kind of look at how do these plants kind of behave, the canopies behave with one another. So there are multiple things that you could kind of experiment with. And of course there are so one of the options that we have is to have lawns everywhere, right? I mean, you look at any public project, you would find there are lawns and lawns. But the other alternative to lawns is to actually have a wildflower meadow. As romantic as it may sound, in our climatic condition, the wildflower meadows may not actually be wildflower meadows, but they may just be patches which are covered by naturalized vegetation. So, but because our cities are so much obliterated by us humans, what happens is that the many of the species that you would find growing so well, like let's say a good example, KRVA lawn. Next to our canteen we have a lawn which is in the past, which has not been a lawn because it's been allowed to kind of grow lush and green, and it has got an ecological component to it. Like it allows for so many butterflies and beetles and bugs, etc., to kind of come there. But what is salient is that there is one particular species of plant which is highly invasive that has almost taken over that entire lawn. Okay, so so even though it may sound as an ecologically sound system, it may not be. So you have to be very careful of what is that plant that kind of takes over your so-called wildflower meadow. But having said that, a wildflower meadow or a naturalized patch wherein you just allow for these local native plants. Maybe you sow them the seeds and you just leave it at that, or you just let it be. You plant them and you allow for the plants to grow up. Like in a place like Cochin or in Bombay, plants would definitely take over. This may not work well for, let's say, Udaipur or Jodhpur or any other place. The land would look barren. So you may have to kind of think of a alternative way of, kind of covering it. So the point I'm trying to make is you don't have to put lawns everywhere. There are other ways of covering the ground with planting. Okay, so then where would you do this, or why would you do this is completely up to you. Like in this particular project, we thought these wildflower meadows could probably be used for erosion control on the slopes. They are low in maintenance. You really don't have to kind of go and, kind of check whether, things are there or not. If there are some dry patches, maybe you check for the reason why has it gone dry. Is it because of an invasive plant, because of some other reason, or because, there is a surrounding building whose window kind of reflects the heat, the sunlight directly onto a patch. There are all sorts of problems that you may have to kind of worry about. So if that is the case, then you see if you can block it in some way. But if it can't be blocked, then maybe you put something else there. You don't really go and plant things there. And it can be grown naturally, and it kind of creates a very different atmosphere from that of a lawn. So so these are design decisions that you may want to kind of look at. Again, many of you have projects wherein you're talking of water filtration, like you would like some of the water from your project to move through a constructed wetland and then it goes to the nala, or you would like to take a little bit of the water from the nala into a constructed biotope, and then you would like to get the water back, things like that. So you need to be aware that there are plants which actually grow on the edges of water. These are plants which are okay in getting inundated, like their roots don't rot even if they stand in water for like months together. But when the water recedes, the plants would still survive. The roots may not completely dry off. So, you need to be aware of those plants. And many of these plants are the ones that are usually used in the constructed wetland, because these plants have the ability, like it's a natural adaptation that they have to absorb, nutrients from both soil as well as from water. And it's that ability that we are tapping into when we are using them for phytoremediation, or using plants to remediate the water quality. Okay, so these are plants which can take inundation, which means they're flood tolerant, and the roots, like I told you, it could even absorb the pollution level as well. Highly low in maintenance. They can be grown naturally. I mean, you may have to, kind of seed them initially, or plant the bulbs, or kind of get the rhizome. The rhizome is like the ginger, like the that part of the stem or the root that kind of goes into the soil, and from where the rest of the shoot kind of grows up. And it also kind of helps in creating that wetlandish kind of an atmosphere, but that's very visual, which is why I wanted to avoid telling you that. But for client presentations, these are terms that one needs to use. But yeah, so canna is a very good example. Like I'm sure you know what cannas are. Like if you've seen movies in the 1970s and 60s, you would always find Asha Parekh and Rajesh Khanna running around gardens of canna, right? And then these are the other plants that one could use. Typha is a species that grows very well, in many of these cases. Okay, that's a hell lot of information for you guys. But now we come to how do we draw up a planting plan? Okay, so a planting plan which is drawn up for, let's say, a presentation purpose may look like the one on the top. Okay, wherein there is a very, very clear way in which you draw the tree, but the tree does not hide whatever is below it. There is a way in which you would show the shrubs which are below the tree also to be somehow seen. The footpath or the stepping stones are there, the different kind of textural variations that you would want to kind of showcase, that would all be shown in terms of how it's an impression of what would be there in real sight, right? Like if there are plants which actually have a lilacish bluish flowering character, then you may want to kind of stipple those things in there, and but then it's not very crude. It's not like in AutoCAD में जाके या Photoshop में जाके मैंने brush लेके खच 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 spots डाला. It's not very crude. It's done in a very in a very gentle manner. Okay, so this is how you would draw it out for a presentation drawing. Like let's say your main landscape drawing, your comprehensive landscape development plan or something, CLPD. That's how you may want to kind of draw it up. But for your planting drawing, like if there is an overlay which basically is only for the site or the contractor or the jurors or the faculty or your friends to understand how have you kind of gone about it, or if you want to kind of create a bill of quantities, a BOQ out of this, it's impossible to draw out. I don't know how many plants are these, like I don't know how many plants are these. So for that purpose, you may need to kind of draw up another drawing, which basically is usually a set of the working drawing. So we don't expect you to draw a drawing like this, but we would like you to draw an overlay or a planting plan, which is basically a hybrid of these. Wherein you show this, but then you at least point it out and write, okay, not SU4, but you write that this is SU4. You could write SU4. It could have a table or a matrix which would tell us How does it look in terms of its form? What does it do? Like, is it a plant which can be grown in a cluster? It's flowering in nature, and what it does is it creates a buffer between the pathway, and its height is not more than let's say 300 to 450 mm. So the idea is not to kind of cover the visual side, but it's just as an edge. Is it thorny in nature? I would believe no, because it's right next to the pathway. Anybody can probably topple and fall over it, or children could get bruised by it. So this may not be thorny, but maybe some other planters. You know, so this is a differentiation. This is how you draw it up for a presentation purpose, but this is how you draw it up for a functional purpose. Like, let's say, a planting plan wherein you know how many trees are there, what spacing are they grown. Now, when you actually give a working drawing, you may even specify the dimension of where the trees are being planted. You may even specify where the cluster edges are, some check dimension, so that the contractor doesn't go and plant this so close to this, and बाद में they'll scratch your head when you go to site and say, साहब drawing के हिसाब से ही लगाया था, लेकिन ये पौधा पता नहीं कहाँ लगा है, जगह ही नहीं है, आपके drawing में गड़बड़ है. So there are all sorts of funny things that you would come up with. So it's good to somehow give some check dimensions to the trees. A practice that most landscape architects don't do, but it's always good to do that. So yeah, so this is how it is. Now, what I would like to do is quickly show you one project, and not talk too much, but just show you. Okay, so this is a project for a housing for a developer in a big city. So the idea here was that this was all on top of a basement. Okay, now if you have a basement or if you have a terrace garden, then how do you go about planting it? Now that is something that Arjun would actually talk about, in his presentation in the next turn. So I'm not going to get into the details of it, but trust us, when we say that it's possible to do planting on top of a podium slab as well. You may not be aware that, but most of the projects that you see around are actually planted on top of a basement. Projects like, let's say, the malls in Parel, and in many other places where you see terrace gardens, or like podium gardens, or actual drop-offs with trees and things like that. What you don't realize is that there is parking below, or there are services below, there are things below. So it's quite possible, and Arjun will give you a very detailed lecture on the same. So here, this was a project wherein this was again on top of a podium, and the idea was that the architecture had to stand out, and the landscape was not to have a visual presence as such. So that was the brief. The brief was that the landscape has to just flow into the architecture. So that's how the landscape architects kind of started designing the landscape. And it had to have this character of an extremely restrained kind of an edge. So here, so these are all sketched views which have been shown to the client while the design presentations were on, which basically means that the trees are not up, the building is not up, but the landscape architect and the architect, while he's designing the building and the landscape, knows very clearly as to where do they want the trees to be. Where do they want those trees to be? Large, huge trees with canopies, or do they want them to have a sort of a globular canopy, but more like a funnel? So like you see the stems of the trees and the canopy is way up, so that the visual ground doesn't look very claustrophobic. Because the problem was, this site was, as it is, extremely narrow, and they wanted the clients, when they buy into the property, to feel as if there is space. And in such cases, if you plant it up with lots of trees, it may be a problem. So then how would you want your front guard room to be? Does it have to be a badly designed porta cabin, or can it be kind of integrated with the name of your project, and it kind of goes in, and it kind of becomes the rest of the landscape? The other edges, wherein you want to kind of completely like kill the view. Does that edge have to be just one type of planting, or can that be done in a way wherein you have lower plants at the edge, slightly more taller shrubs, and then even more taller shrubs? So even though the space between the boundary wall and our plot and the next building is very narrow, but it still has some level of space. During the day, while people are around, do we want the entire thing to be a lawn just because a client said, I want visual access, I don't want planting to block anything? No, you could have planting, like, can it be accent planting? Can there be some enclosures in the landscape, which again take its design language inspired by the building luvers? So the building luvers kind of form the inspiration for the luvers in there. And do they necessarily, all seating enclosures, do they necessarily have to be pergolas on the top or pavilions on the top? No, they don't have to be. One, they could just be under a tree as well, or they could just be, two walls. But we are confident that this would work. Why? Because we know that we've designed this with the solar angles, so you look at a project and you know that, in a general study of a project, it's usually in the evenings that, the children would come out and play. So when you play, there would be mothers, or there would be ayah, there would be fathers, or there would be grandparents, who would possibly accompany the child, who would want to keep an eye on the child but still have a life of their own, chat with their friends and colleagues and things like that. So in that case, would you create a space for them to sit? And at that time of the day, if the sunlight is basically streaming in from this side, maybe an enclosure without a roof could also work. Maybe the tree, kind of covers them during the daytime. So it doesn't have to be like another pavilion, which also, kind of blocks that space. It could just be a freestanding sculptural wall. And when you put seating, do you put seating like regimental? AutoCAD में एक seat लगाया, offset मार के एक और seat लगाया, array करके एक और seat लगाया. No, you don't. You kind of create enclosures. That's why the seating is done in a way wherein you could sit and talk to each other. Now, I know in this project it's very fancy to put seats without backrests because that's what looks international and cool, and that's something which all of us are guilty of doing. But it's nice to have a backrest sometimes, for seats, and especially for old people, So if you have a space which is kind of designed for the nana nannies and, for the old people, older generation, it's good to think of the anthropo metrics of that seat, wherein a backrest, a armrest, wherein they could give the thrust and then get up or sit. All these small things make a big difference. Again, I'm going away from planting. If your building has a courtyard or if your building has a gash in it, would you want to kind of create some sort of a seating there? Would that seat want to have a shadow edge on the side in the night, which could be lit up with an LED strip? So would you want to kind of really plant till the edge and, kind of hide that lighting, or no? Would you want to keep your planting away from it? What is the plinth protection of your building with the landscape? Maybe behind this planting patch, there is a 700 wide Kota stone band, which is like a plinth protection, so that it's like a splash proof, like when it rains, the soil doesn't splash onto the wall. And it's also a maintenance strip, so that, the Mali could actually walk around it and clean up the spaces. People could walk around it, clean up the glass, from outside and things like that. And would you want to kind of obstruct the views from inside to the courtyard? No, definitely you wouldn't, which is why the planting would be at a lower height. But having said that, ये थोड़ा ज़्यादा ही low हो गया. Maybe it could have been a bit higher. So there are all these things that you would come up with while you are designing. And then you'll see all sorts of errors also. Like, how do you see a tree growing out of a root, like without a root from planting? Like, you'd kill the tree if you do that. You definitely need more space around it and things like that. So yeah. And then in many projects, you will realize that, there is a requirement for a 6-meter wide fire tender access path. In some cities and near some buildings, a fire tender access path may even be 9 meters. So all you have between your building and the boundary edge would be, let's say, 12 meters or 10 meters. And then 9 meters is the space where you can't really plant anything. You can't create any obstructions. So you only have that 1 meter or 1.5 meters on the side, wherein you would find all your service consultants will start fighting with you, and the architect saying that, hey, fire hydrant path jana hai, wahan se sewage line bhi jayega because your STP is on the other side. Wahan se drainage line jayega. Wahan se you would find irrigation lines will also go. And the electrical consultant would come and say, your building. At the last moment, they would wake up and say, oh, by the by, you need to put in 53 earthing pits for this project. And earthing pits, like you can camouflage them on the top, but earthing pits can't be clustered together. There is a spacing between two earthing pits. And you will realize, oh God, जो client को मैंने दिखाया और जो मैंने approve किया, वो landscape planting तो यहाँ हो ही नहीं सकता. It's a dilemma which I'm sure all my other colleagues would be very well aware of, and so it's very, very important as architects to kind of coordinate these things from day one, So, and when you say 6-meter fire tender path, it does not mean that you cannot plant in there. Okay, you cannot plant trees in there, but it doesn't mean you have to pave up the whole 6 meters. But it also depends on the chief fire officer of that particular zone, because some chief fire officers do not allow for this to happen, but some chief fire officers do allow, provided you prove it to them that of the 6 meters, I'm only going to pave 3 meters because it's a one-way circulation loop for my cars to kind of move through. Otherwise, it's going to be a kind of a pedestrian zone. The rest of the 3 meters is essentially a reinforced green. Okay, a reinforced green essentially means there are grass pavers out here. So you may ask me, where are the grass pavers? Grass pavers तो दिखता है ना, Sandeep. दिखता है, लेकिन there are technology allows us to have high density polyethylene grass pavers, like HDP grass pavers, which actually look like an egg crate. It looks like a chani, if I may say so, in very crude language. If just a second, please. Hello, Harry. 5 minutes. 5 minutes. 5 minutes. I'll just wrap it up in 5 minutes. Yeah, sure. Thanks. Yeah, so you could have grass pavers in there, and that's the way it could kind of function. So I'll just quickly show you the final images of these. So those were the intent images, and this is how it kind of really looks like. So yeah, so you could see the planting. There were some existing trees which are there. There are some new trees which are just planted, and they will eventually grow up to be what they are. If you look here, you would find how the edge planting kind of looks like. So this is how the landscape kind of looks like. The lighting, you could see that there are no pole lights or post stop lights, but it's like how Bandita explained in the last class. Yeah. With that, I come to the end of the presentation. If you have any questions, you could easily ask them, or else you could log into the channels and have a discussion with your mentors. Okay. Yeah, that's it. Sorry, that was a very long lecture. I didn't intend to take such a long lecture, but while I started speaking, I lost track of time. Sorry about that. Any questions, or was that kind of clear?
Yeah, it was pretty clear. Learned a lot.
Okay, sure. So if there are no other questions, you can actually log into the faculty mentor channels and maybe have a conversation with the faculty members. Those students who are in Bandita's group can log into my channel, because Bandita may not be around for the next few weeks. So I'll be looking at your work from now on. Okay. I think there are some messages that have kind of come in. Okay, yeah. So Sarth has shared a nice link which you can look at it later. Yeah.
Sandeep, what did
Yes.
you say for European Plaza? The word I couldn't catch the word.
Oh, it's a
POS.
BOSQUE. BOSQUE. Right now, faculty. It's BOSQUE, right? BOSQUE.
It's also spelled BOSQUET.
Yeah.
All right, thank you.
Okay, so that's it. Thank you, faculty members. Thank you, students, for taking out time on a Saturday to do this. I'm really sorry that I, kind of extended it for so long. I really lost track of time while I was speaking.
That's okay,
So
Sandeep.
sorry.
Students from my group, please let's meet right now. We'll try to wrap this the individual class up as quickly as possible, but we'll continue directly now.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. Sure.
And
Any
students from
questions?
my
Any
group
doubts?
will
Yeah.
log in
We're
at
around.
4.
Sorry.
5 o'clock. We have it at 5 o'clock, okay, with me.
Okay, Saika. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sandeep, that was a good lecture. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Oh, let me just download the attendance. And we are done. Okay, so my group and Bandita's group can log into my channel. Thanks. Thank you, Mohit. Yeah.